Young Turks. Now we have a great guest for you guys. Rashid Khalidi is Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University. Professor Khalidi, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
It's a pleasure.
First, let's talk about Mahmoud Abbas's campaign at the United Nations. For those at home, can you explain exactly what it was that he was asking for and who he was asking?
He was asking the United Nations to accept the state of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations, which involved asking the Secretary General to ask the Security Council to pass on it, which requires a majority of 9 votes and no veto by a permanent member, after which a 2/3 majority of the General Assembly would have to vote on it. So that's what he was asking for.
Is there a way of getting any type of statehood without going through the Security Council?
Well, a country can be accepted as a non-member state observer in the United Nations. North and South Korea, West Germany have had, and other countries have had that status until they were accepted as member states. The Vatican still has that status.
And would it have made sense to pursue that either as well or in place of this?
Well, I think one of the things that the Palestinians were trying to signal with going to the Security Council was that they are fed up with this illusion that the United States is an even-handed broker or an honest broker or a mediator. They're furious at the United States for its letting them down, not only over the last couple of years that President Obama has been in office, but really going back for a period of 20 years during which the United States has brokered a mediation process which has led to a measurably worse situation for the Palestinians on almost every level.
You know, Professor Khalidi, I have to confess to you that I'm rather surprised that the Palestinians have that reaction. I'm shocked that they still believe in the U.S. at all as a fair mediator.
Well, there are unfortunately people in the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah who have harbored that illusion. Most Palestinians have been cured of it long ago, and they would like to see a settlement, they would like to see peace, they would like to see serious negotiations, but they have long since ceased to believe that the United States could do that. I mean, I lost those illusions many years ago when I was an advisor back in the early 90s to the negotiations that started at Madrid. It was clear that the United States was even harder in its positions on some issues than the Israelis themselves. What's the point, therefore, of bringing them in?
So, Professor Khalidi, I want to see what's next, right? So, what happened after Abbas did this, and what was the reaction of the United Nations, the Security Council, et cetera, and what happens after that?
Well, the first thing is that the Security Council is capable of delaying this, and the United States, through arm twisting, is perhaps capable of preventing a majority vote. They don't necessarily even have to veto. When I say preventing this, I mean delaying it for weeks and weeks and perhaps months procedurally in the Security Council. I mean, countries have been held out of the United Nations membership for literally years and years and years. So it's perfectly possible for the United States to either stonewall on procedure in the Security Council, or if the issue is forced to a vote, to manage through arm twisting and so forth to rally enough states such that the motion does not get the 9 votes in favor. So the United States doesn't even have to veto by abstention. 7 members of the Security Council could torpedo this.
Right, but, you know, I never thought that it was possible to win on this. Of course the United States was going to vote with Israel. It would literally be the most shocking thing in covering politics that I would have seen in 16 years if they didn't veto it. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking that, and this is the part I'm not getting, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I was thinking that they were going to at least go to the General Assembly, get non-state member status, something where they are on the board. And then it becomes some degree of an illegal occupation in the West Bank, et cetera.
They could still do that. There's nothing to prevent their going, even if things are either deadlocked in the Security Council or they fail to obtain the majority, or there's a U.S. veto. They could still go to the General Assembly. Sorry.
Was that the original plan, or this was the original plan all along?
You know what? I don't know. I mean, I haven't talked to very many people about this, and I've talked to very few who are directly involved. But what I gather is that the thing that drove this leadership, which is, you know, notorious for equivocating and for being willing to believe what any normal, rational person would not believe about the United States. The thing that drove this leadership over the edge was the arrogance and the disdainfulness of the American envoys headed by Dennis Ross, who went to Ramallah to try and dissuade them from doing it. That seems to have been what finally decided them. The United States the demeanor of these people was so absolutely haughty and insulting that they said, forget about it. We're simply going to go for broke on this.
Now, I'm not talking much about the substance of it because to me it's so obvious. I mean, for how many decades have they told the Palestinians to pursue peaceful and diplomatic measures, which is exactly what I agreed with. And then when you pursue peaceful and diplomatic measures, they say somehow you're threatening them. I mean, my question...
engaging in lawfare and in delegitimizing Israel if they don't use violence and instead use diplomatic and legal means.
Right. And by the way, you're also pursuing a path that is exactly how Israel became a state.
Precisely.
Right. So I don't think that there's any argument against it. So, but that's my question. When, sure, to the outside world, they say, oh, this is trying to delegitimize Israel, whatever. Here in the U.S., they don't even try. They're like, well, Israel's against it, so who cares? We're against it. What's the point of a conversation? But I'm curious what they say internally. Like, do they tell them
what the U.S. administration says internally?
What the U.S. administration or even Israel says to the Palestinian negotiators or leadership, how can they possibly have a rational argument against this?
Well, I mean, I have no idea what the people inside the administration think. My guess, if you wanted to push me, is that all they're thinking about would seem to me to be a domestic American political calculation. I don't think any of them is thinking of the foreign policy consequences. I don't think any of them is seriously envisaging that this is an issue that has to be decided on the merits. I'm sure they would deny that in public, but I don't think there's any other interpretation of it that's possible. And to be very frank, this has essentially been the case pretty much since Harry Truman. I mean, there have been exceptions, but it's pretty much been the case since Harry Truman.
All right, so Professor Khalidi, now let's look at the other side of this equation and see what the Palestinians can do differently, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, there's this nonsense about not recognizing the existence of Israel. And I say it's nonsense because I got news. They exist.
Well, they have recognized them. I mean, that's what was done in 1993. Mm-hmm. The PLO was recognized as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO in return recognized the state of Israel. So that's been done.
So from at least a PR perspective, shouldn't the Palestinian leadership go up to the UN and say, look, we would like to be recognized as a state, and in return, even though we've already done it, but since Israel won't acknowledge it and the U.S. won't acknowledge it, in return, we will, give the recognition that the state of Israel exists, the thing that you say you want all along. So let's do that deal.
Part of the problem is they've done that. So the Israelis have gone and raised the bar. They've said you have to recognize a specific definition of the state of Israel, which we have just devised and which we have just insisted on. No Israeli negotiator ever insisted that the Palestinians not only recognize the existence of the state of Israel, but recognize Israel as a Jewish state until a few years ago. So after the Palestinians had done what the Israelis had always demanded, they just raised the bar. So it's not a matter of recognizing Israel. The Palestinians have already done that. One could argue that they were grossly mistaken in doing so without demanding reciprocal recognition of the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people within a Palestinian state within determined frontiers. I mean, that's what, in my opinion, should have been done way back in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, there's this great comedy of Israel insisting that they be recognized, but at the same time, we have this entire problem because Israel will not allow Palestine to exist. I mean, there is no more ironic argument to be made in the world. So, I mean, I know we're stuck in this situation, but in reality, would it even hurt to even say, yes, we recognize Israel as a Jewish state, because it is a Jewish state, and it's going to be a Jewish state.
Well,
so
you have two problems with that. The first problem is that 20% of its population are Arabs. Mm-hmm. And this is their homeland. They were there before most Israeli Jews ever arrived there. They were there for generations, for centuries, for millennia, perhaps, certainly centuries. And to say that Israel is a Jewish state, I mean, we don't demand that anybody recognizes the United States as a Christian state or a secular state or whatever kind of state you want to define it as. Nobody normally does that. This is just an additional demand intended, first of all, to say, we have rights here, you must accept our national narrative, and those rights are preemptive over your rights. I mean, is Israel going to accept that Palestine is the homeland of the entire Palestinian people? And you have to go back and read Netanyahu's speech to Congress, say, in May. He says all of Palestine, he doesn't say Palestine, all of Eretz Israel, Judea, Samaria, this is our homeland. What he is saying, we are here by right, you are here by sufferance. Your recognition of Israel as a Jewish state and of this as our homeland, the whole country as our homeland, means basically our narrative is right, and you are interlopers here. This is what essentially the Israeli demand is, for the Palestinians, in effect, to become Zionists and say, we were wrong, we never should have obstructed anything you did in trying to take our country away from us, what we understood to be our country away from us. We should have always said, yes, you have rights, let's pack up and leave. And that's essentially what's behind this demand, that only one people has a unique right to this country as a homeland. I never saw a Netanyahu or any Israeli leader say, this is a homeland for both peoples. This is a country which is the birthplace of blah blah blah. It's always we have a unique right in this country, and I think that is really a problem. In addition to the fact that the Palestinians would be asked to sell their 1.2 million Palestinian brethren and sisters who are citizens of the state of Israel down the river. Their second-class status would then be accepted and legitimized by a Palestinian admission that, in fact, they are second-class citizens in the state of Israel. It's a Jewish state, they're not Jews, therefore it's not their state.
Yeah,
and that would be very hard for any Palestinian leader to do.
Now, when I heard that speech of Netanyahu at the U.S. Congress, I was actually surprised, because even as right-wing as Netanyahu is and as radical as he is, when he said Eretz Israel, meaning Greater Israel, it belongs...
The entire land of Israel, precisely.
It belongs to us entirely. Well, that's basically saying we are going to occupy you forever, and we're never going to let it go. I mean, that's an unbelievably extreme statement. So then that leads to the toughest question of all. When you have the other side who says, we just own it and we're never going to give it to you. I mean, for PR purposes, we say we'll pretend we're in favor of negotiations as we block it off at every turn. Then, my God, what do you do?
Well, I think the Palestinians have to really regroup and rethink a lot. I think their strategy, all their strategies of the past couple of decades have been proven bankrupt. Negotiating from a position of weakness under American auspices, with the United States putting its big thumb on the scales in favor of the already superior party, was a mistake. What Hamas called resistance, or what ended up being, among other things, the killing of innocent civilians, and also led to incredibly ferocious Israeli attacks, which killed, in the case of the attack on Gaza in December of 2008 and January 2009, killed almost 1,400 Palestinians, almost all of them civilians, maybe 100 or 200 of them actually fighters, in exchange for the death of 13 Israelis, more than half of them soldiers. So, this is not resistance. It's suicide. It does include war crimes. I mean, killing these Palestinians was war crimes, but killing Israeli civilians is also, in most cases, both of these instances is in most cases a war crime. So all the strategies, in my view, have failed. The only strategy that I think holds out any hope is to appeal for a much more broadly based multilateral international intervention than that of the United States, for the Palestinians to reunify their national movement around the national consensus, to adopt only nonviolent means, to reject violence against Israel. It's foolish and suicidal to use violence. This is a country that is so extraordinarily strong and, in fact, is united by violence against it. Nonviolence is going to be met with violence. Palestinian nonviolence has been met with systematic violence of the occupation forces. It's still the only way. Saul Alinsky paraphrases Gandhi as saying, we didn't use guns because we didn't have guns, right? And even if you don't believe in the moral argument, which you do and I do, which is that violence is not the way to go, it just doesn't make any sense logically to try to go up against Israel through violence. You're going to get crushed. And there's a moral argument, which I would accept in most cases, but not, frankly, in all cases. I don't think you could have used nonviolence against the Nazis, frankly.
Right.
But in many other cases, it is the correct approach. Secondly, there's the moral argument that if you engage in the kind of war against Israel that has has been in fact the case, much, if not most, of what's being done ends up being the equivalent of war crimes or actual war. You're carrying out, I don't want to use the term terrorism because I think it's such a loaded term, but the killing of civilians in most instances is simply not acceptable in international law. So there's
for good reason.
There's a legal argument in addition to a moral argument, and then there's the argument you just made, which is just dumb. It doesn't make sense against this enemy, against this people, which has this history, such that it's been cemented by suffering and persecution. Attacks of that sort are simply going to cement the society, which we've seen again and again and again. So admittedly, that history is going to lead many Israelis to feel any criticism of them is an attack and that they're persecuted and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it is the way to go, I think, for all those reasons.
And then that leads to the final question, which is how. So you and I agree nonviolence is definitely the right answer. They tried a diplomatic and peaceful route through the UN. That's been blocked for now. They should definitely keep pursuing that.
I would continue with the diplomatic approach.
No question, no question. Then what else do you do? How do they demonstrate in a nonviolent fashion that is in any way effective, whether it's to gather public and world attention to it? Just how do they do it?
Well, one thing I think that Palestinians have to do, I mean, I'm sitting here in the United States, it's easy for me to talk, but one of the things I'm sorry, a little bit of a cold here. One of the things that I think they have to do is to figure out a way to appeal to Israelis. I mean, the process of settlement and building basically these huge Israeli colonies all over the occupied West Bank, such that you now have in the range of 500,000 to 600,000 settlers, is vastly expensive for Israel and for the Israeli people. And the protests of the last several months in Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities have shown that the Israeli public is conscious of the fact that they're really getting shafted. This is a country with a high growth rate. This is a country with an incredibly prosperous elite and technological class, but where the social safety net is being shredded by a neoliberal, ruthless neoliberal policies that have been followed really since Netanyahu's last government back in the late 90s. And connecting with that by saying, you know, whatever you think of us, your country's policies are one of the things that impoverishes you. It privileges a few 100,000 settlers at the expense of the other 5 million Israelis, 5.5 million Israeli Jews. I mean, the Palestinians inside Israel are highly disadvantaged compared to everybody else, but even Israeli Jews are disadvantaged.
Right. And so, I agree with that again, but I wonder, how do you show that? That's like, I'm thinking.
Well, that's tough. I mean, it's easier said than done. I agree.
So, like,
I'm
is
not
it
sure
marches?
How you show that. I mean, the Palestinians have never really tried to properly appeal either to this country or to the Israeli public. They've done a fair to middling job of appealing to other countries in the world, the third world, or even Europe, but they've done an appallingly bad job in this country. And in Israel. And those are the two most important countries in this equation, frankly.
Right. I saw the story of these young kids who went and did a violin protest at one of the walls, where they went and did a little concert of Mozart at the wall, which I thought was incredibly touching. So, I mean, the only answer I can come up with is mass just protest by simply sitting at the wall where they're trying to build something along the lines to show the world, and then just video. They have to get video out to the rest of the world. If they don't get video to the rest of the world, whatever protest they did not exist.
So they have to also break a barrier that's specific to the United States and Israel and to the American and Israeli media. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, selling a story on nonviolence, Palestinian nonviolence in the New York Times is almost impossible. I mean, I don't know if you noticed the recent coverage of Ethan Bronner, the New York Times bureau chief in Israel.
No.
The recent story on him in the Columbia Review of Journalism. I mean, I think that shows, is an example of how embedded, as it were, so many reporters and producers and editors and so forth for the mainstream media are in Israeli society. I mean, the guy had a son who served in the Israeli Defense Forces. He works, he has as his agent a PR firm that basically shills for the most right-wing extreme settler movement leaders in Israel. And, how can you sell such a person a story on Palestinian nonviolence? He wrote something on Abbas's return to Palestine the other day, in which the first 6 paragraphs were larded with quotes from Israelis. I mean, imagine a story on Israel with the first 6 quotes in the story, in the first 6 paragraphs, from Palestinians. only in the New York Times. And that's an example of the kind of problem you have, not so much in carrying out the protests, but in getting word out about them.
You know, I hear you on that, but video solves a lot of problems.
Well, it does with the younger generation.
Yes.
I mean, my students, people, you know, in their 20s or younger, or even in their 30s, are alive to the fact that the mainstream media is absolutely useless in terms of conveying basic information. They go out and find stuff. They go online, they go on YouTube, they go on Facebook, they go wherever they go. And they find stuff so much more easily and with so much greater variety than their elders. The problem is the people in positions of power in this country are much older than that.
No, but Professor Khalidi, here's the thing. I mean, the mainstream media in this country is useless, not just on this issue, on almost all the issues.
Absolutely.
Right? So, but you just have to wake up to that reality and find a way to circumvent the system. That violent protest that I'm talking about by the kids, if you had that on tape and you put that up on YouTube, I can't tell you how fast that would spread and how many millions of views that it would get. I'm guessing, you know, and if people saw, as they saw in the civil rights era here in the U.S., people walking into the face of violence with nonviolence on their side, and willing to take that on, willing to get hurt for the cause, and you show that over and over, they're not going to be able to stop it.
Well, you know, an Israeli NGO, to their great credit, has handed video cameras out to Palestinian kids to film some of these nonviolent protests in villages along the course of the wall. That's basically separated a large part of the West Bank from another large part of the West Bank. There's an illusion that this thing is essentially to separate, you know, Israel from the occupied West Bank. It's not intended to do that. It's intended to protect Israeli settlements inside the occupied territories and to separate a large part of the land belonging to Palestinians from the Palestinian villages where the people who own that land live. And so there've been a series of protests in villages all along the course of this wall. And they actually gave video cameras to kids there, and they produced some fantastic stuff. What has to obviously be done is that stuff has to be fed into, you know, a larger audience.
Yep. YouTube is your friend.
I agree with you on this.
Okay, Professor Rashid Khalidi, great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.